We're supposed to tell people where you're going with presentations, so I would like to make a very brief introduction about the importance of looking at things from a door-to-door point of view, which will not be strange to many of you in the room. I want to give you a brief idea of what the European Commission thinks things should be like in urban logistics in 2030. And then I want to talk about a few examples of cities which we visited during our study, which provide some interesting examples. And I'll make one or two observations, not criticisms. And finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about what might happen in terms of measures at a European level in terms of urban distribution. This is a city I know and love well, the city of Chester, an ancient city, originally Roman, with medieval buildings and a very attractive centre for shopping. And therefore it has a time window for freight deliveries of generally early in the morning and late in the afternoon. And the point of this slide is that you can see there are signs up saying you've got to deliver at certain times of the day. And you can see the photo on the far right is of deliveries being made at about 8:45 in the morning. There's nobody around. It's a very pleasant environment, the city of Chester at that time of day. But it completely ignores the photo at the bottom, the fact that at 8:45 in the morning, as with almost every reasonably sized city in Europe, there are traffic jams outside, slow-moving traffic. And I think the point of this slide is simply that city authorities very often only see things from the point of view, naturally enough, of their own city and the environment there. They don't always look beyond the city limits and look at what's happening around them and the impact of their policies on the logistics chain. A little bit about us, because many of you won't have heard of us probably. We're a freight transport consultancy, particularly economics, based in Chester in the United Kingdom, 30-year track record. And the reason I'm here is that we carried out a study for the European Commission with Professor Filippi and his colleagues last year mainly, looking at urban freight transport for the European Commission, for DG Move. The study was mainly looking at policy, and the objective was to look at ways to achieve sustainable urban distribution, by which we mean trying to find a balance between, on the one hand, economics, trying to do things efficiently from everybody's point of view, and also from an environmental point of view, trying to balance those two things. In terms of what we had to do, we had to cover the whole of the European Union and all surface modes of transport. We mainly had to carry out a review of everything that's going on at a local level, which is, of course, impossible. We had to provide recommendations for action at a European level and effectively providing advice for future policy. I should say now that the Commission has not decided what it's going to do. I will be able to give you some ideas, but I don't know what they're going to do. We visited 10 different cities all over Europe, which are listed there. So what does the European Commission think life should be like for urban logistics in 2030? This vision was published in the Transport White Paper in March 2011. It was set out before we had come to any conclusions in our study. Quite bravely, I think the European Commission said that their policy goal for 2030 was essentially carbon dioxide-free city logistics in major urban centres. And what does this involve, according to the European Commission? It involves minimising the number of freight movements, fair enough, and distance required to carry them out. That may be more debatable in practice. Using low-emission trucks, fine. More ITS, which I'm not going to say very much about because I know we're going to talk about it more later. And reducing noise pollution from freight vehicles to facilitate nighttime deliveries. There are huge issues about nighttime deliveries, but the Commission sees that as part of the vision for 2030. And another goal, which isn't necessarily always put with city logistics, I think should be, is their goal of 30% of road freight over 300 kilometres should shift to other modes of transport. That's controversial as well. But if we're looking at a perspective of beyond city limits, it's also an important policy goal. So a few case studies. These are observations. Paris, it provides some interesting examples of things that are going on at a local level. Very simple thing. They've produced guidelines on the design of loading bays for freight on street. It's a very relatively simple thing to do in infrastructural terms. I think they have 15,000 designated loading bays in Paris. Rail. They're using rail for trying to get freight as close to the destinations of freight in the city of Paris by Paris-Bercy station for Monoprix. This is quite difficult to make it pay commercially. They haven't done that so far. My conclusion anyway was it's very difficult to do that, but they're having a go. And finally, the famous Petite Reine private sector-led last mile deliveries by bicycle. In niche markets, that may work. I'm more dubious about rail, personally. Krakow. The graph at the top shows the trend for deliveries into the city centre of Krakow. The time window, there's a time window. Again, it's a very attractive city centre. But it's a fairly generous time window, from 11 o'clock at night through to 10 o'clock in the morning. But you can see there's a huge peak between 9:15 and 9:30 for various reasons. They've been trying to reduce this peak, and they've consulted with operators and with customers extensively, which we do think is good practice. And they're considering using mobility credits to incentivize freight customers to receive deliveries. This is an interesting idea in that it's looking at the customers rather than the operators, trying to get the customers to ration their use of freight. Basically, the idea is that over a certain limit of number of deliveries, you have to start paying for them. At the moment, though, I think Geneva has tried this as well. It's difficult to implement. Geneva, I think, has not cancelled it, but has stopped trying to use this system. Krakow's thinking about it. I think it's one of these ideas which is a good idea in practice, in theory, but maybe more difficult in practice. Utrecht. Couple of, again, an attractive city centre. There's a time window for deliveries, but with exemptions for electric vehicles, for example. And I think Utrecht is interesting from 2 points of view. First of all, it has a private sector-led consolidation service, which you can see there, called the Cargo Hopper. It receives no direct public subsidy. It does receive some advantages from indirect incentives. Because it's an electric vehicle, just as in Rome, as was described before, you get free access. This is an interesting model because they've managed to create a critical mass of traffic to support the service with no public subsidy. The beer boat is at the bottom there is a very famous, in the world that we inhabit, a very famous example because it's using a barge along the canals at Utrecht. This is a very niche market, obviously because of the geography of Utrecht, but also physically what is required to make deliveries at this location. It makes sense in this particular case to use a beer boat, but again, non-road modes are not going to be, in my opinion, a major development in this area in the future. London, an incredibly complex regulatory environment, a number of different public authorities providing these regulations. It must be a nightmare for logisticians to deliver there. The most high-profile thing that's been done in London is the congestion charge. And indirectly, again, this has led to the development of a consolidation centre. It's not clear whether it's making money, but at least they have tried. At the bottom there you've got an electric vehicle which gets in and out of London without paying the congestion charge. There's also an incentive through the charge to have higher load factors, which is obviously a good thing. And in a relatively low-key way, the city authorities in London have been trying to develop more of a focus on the demand side and getting offices, for example, to develop what they call delivery service plans, which is effectively good procurement practice, trying to not just order stationery, for example, every 5 minutes. I'm exaggerating, but trying to have 2 or 3 deliveries a week instead of 10 deliveries a week. So it's just good procurement practice. Framework for sustainable distribution policy. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. We think there should be a lot more focus on planning, more focus on pricing as well, which is probably more controversial, more focus on indirect incentives for people to carry out things in the right way, more harmonisation of regulations, and more focus on sustainable distribution parks, as we call them, so interporti on the edge of cities. What have we said in terms of what the European Union should do? We've suggested that there are various measures which should be looked at. More efficient deliveries, low emission vehicles is obviously a sensible idea, more ITS, more night deliveries, more interporti, more intermodal transfer facilities, and more focus on developing and disseminating good practice. 2 more slides on what I think could happen at the EU level. I think the EU will carry on funding research and development on a technology neutral basis. They won't be trying to pick winners between electric or hybrid or other technologies. I think the European Union is likely to focus on standardization of low emission vehicles and equipment for nighttime deliveries, trying to reduce noise levels, for example, trying to reduce costs for distribution activity and for industry. There will continue to be EU funding for city logistics projects, but probably after cities have produced what we've called urban logistics plans. There'll be more focus within the Civitas programme on genuine innovation. There will be infrastructure funding, I suspect, for these logistic zones on the outskirts of cities, and there may be something done in Marco Polo. I think the Commission may well, perhaps controversially, look at the idea of including cities within their policy of internalisation of external costs. With certain, it won't just be another tax, it'll be tax neutral. So there's all sorts of issues about subsidiarity. There'll be more incentives to make more efficient use of infrastructure. And I suspect, there's no policy on this, but I suspect there may be some kind of reverse subsidiarity measure tried by the Commission, which might mean trying to harmonise access restrictions into cities. That, I think, is a possibility. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.